All right. First rule of the channel, we not talk about the channel. Second rule of the channel, this is not legal advice. So this is going to be the 2024 offseason fantasy football preview for the Houston Texans. And this is the problem when it comes to hype trains in fantasy football is not understanding what the ceiling for guys likely is or how high it can actually go before, essentially it becomes so unlikely to be improbable. And I brought this up before. This is not a real football channel. This is a fantasy football channel. We're looking at like theory behind how to win leagues. My personal rankings reflect what is kind of an aggregate of ADPs out there. I will move guys down if I think they're overvalued, and I will move guys up if I think they're undervalued, because I can go get those guys that are undervalued in all my leagues to give myself the best chance to win leagues. Because those guys that are so undervalued, I can go get. I can guarantee I can get in a way that like a guy that is appropriately valued as a unicorn like a CMC that I can't go get outside of very specific circumstances. That's why my rankings are set up the way that they are. They may or may not be beneficial to you in your leagues, but that would be the idea behind it. So a guy like CJ Stroud, what we're going to talk about today, where I have him as my quarterback 15, this is not saying I think he's bad. It's not saying I think the Texans are going to be bad. I think he's like that overvalued that I'm not going to get him in any leagues. And there's just no point on me theorizing about how he can win me leagues at the price that he's going and the return that I'm likely to get out of him. So when we start breaking this stuff down, remember, that's what I'm thinking about when it comes to guys' rankings relative to their ADPs, where we're guessing that they're going to be valued subjectively in the leagues that we're all in, right? And then I am going to talk a little bit about math. Like I'm not going to get into stuff like mean and median, stuff like that. But from a fantasy football perspective, remember that we want those outlier weeks from a good perspective. Those spike weeks are good. They're going to win us a week. They're going to win us a league. The opposite, those like negative spike weeks, they're also going to like lose us weeks. They're going to lose us our leagues if they happen in the wrong weeks. And in general, like that's why like those guys that are so valuable that have like give you 40-degree days all the time with those spike weeks on top of them. That's why those guys are so valuable, as opposed to those boom bust players that are going to have certain values and certain builds because of the ability for them to only win me the week, but not cost me the week at the same time relative to my opponent. If any of that makes sense, that's why we're talking about this. Also, remember that scoring and yards are generally down in the NFL. So expecting like massive outlier seasons is probably not the best idea in the world. And let's get into it with the Houston Texans. So last year, they were 7th in passing yards. They were tied for 22nd in rushing yards. They were 13th in points for, and they were 11th in points against. So in general, and I could bring this one up right here, the Dolphins led everybody last year in point or yards per game at 401. The Cowboys were first in points for or scoring, 29.9. And part of that was like that defense and the special teams that they had. So we can expect that the Houston Texans that are down here at 40 or 342 yards a game, we can get like a huge increase. We can go up to like 80 yards and not have it be this like strange, unpredictable outlier season. We can also expect that maybe we can get about 10 points per game increase, and it's not going to be like crazy, outside the range of predictability or possibility. So that's not what I'm talking about with any of this stuff. It can occur. I'm also talking about like the likelihood of these things occurring relative to the cost. So yeah, if I had to spend like quarterback 12 prices on CJ Stroud, I could say, hey, theoretically, I could get this like 5,000 yard, 40 touchdown season. If I'm spending quarterback 5 on CJ Stroud, I'm almost saying I am guaranteeing a 5,000 yard, 40 touchdown season. And that's a difference when I look at guys' rankings relative to what I think they're going to be able to return on those investments. So remember last year, Dak led everybody with 36 passing touchdowns, and Tua led everybody with 46-24 in the passing yards department. So, if you're pushing your CJ Stroud up the board and you're expecting like that 5,000 yard passing season, 40 touchdowns, like, he would have been by far and away the leader in passing yards with that improvement. And he also would have beat out Dak in that 36 passing touchdowns. Now, am I saying that he can't do that? No. What I'm saying is like, how much am I willing to pay to find out what he's going to do relative to what he's likely to do? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And this is why I have like the mean and median up there. So looking at CJ Stroud last year, remember he did, he got knocked out of 2 games. He did 18.4 points a game. Brock Purdy did 18.5. And this is going to be important when we look at price, because you're probably better off going for Brock Purdy at his price than you are CJ Stroud at his price. So CJ Stroud, he is going to be my quarterback 15. He's going quarterback 5 on Fantasy Pros, 47 overall on Underdog. And remember, Underdog is a best ball league. It's a wide receiver meta. He's going quarterback 6 with an ADP of 57.2. And then over here on ESPN, he's probably going a little bit like more in line with what his actual value is. He's going quarterback 6 with an overall value of 62. Around the same range as like your Joe Burrows and your Dak Prescotts. I don't think Anthony Richardson should be going down there at this range. Part of how I have my rankings set up are the ability for a guy to win me a league. And I'll bring up Dalton Schultz real quick. I am going to project out that like the over underline on Dalton Schultz is going to be about like 800 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns. I think he's going to be a smart, safe pick where he's going. I don't think he's going to have any way to win me a league. He's going to be one of those guys that I punt on. I say, thank you. I got a piece of a good offense and I go home. Not going to have an upside to win me a league at the cost that he's going. That's just generally how I would look at it with Dalton Kincaid. That's why I would move him down. The other thing to look at is I'm going to be guessing that like Nico, Stefon Diggs, and Tank Dell all have about like a 1,200 yard receiving season and 8 touchdowns. That's going to be my idea behind it. And then finally to look at Joe Mixon, he's going to be about, I'm going to guess like 300 yards receiving. That's going to make CJ Stroud project out just from those fantasy relevant toys to have 4,700 yards passing. And, if we look at Joe Mixon going like 3 receiving touchdowns, that's going to put CJ Stroud at 35 touchdowns already. That's before we talk about the rest of the wide receiver room, the rest of the tight end room, and the rest of the running back room. That's already very difficult for him to achieve relative to what went on in the league last year. Expecting that there's still blood left in that stone with the other guys that are on the roster. That's why I look at CJ Stroud. The other thing to look at CJ Stroud is this outlier, 39 rush attempts, 167 yards rushing, and 3 touchdowns. And I keep bringing this up. In college, that's just not what he did. His last year at Ohio State, 47 rush attempts, 108 yards. That was the year after he did 32 rush attempts for -20. And then in 2020, he did 1 rush attempt for 48 yards, a touchdown. Not saying he's not athletic, not saying he doesn't have the ability to have the nimbly bimbly. It's just saying that like this is not something that he's done in the past. And if I'm expecting to have a significant statistical increase in the passing game, it's probably also not a good idea that I expect to get a significant increase in the rushing department to go along with this. So when I bring this up as a projection of 5,000 yards passing, 40 touchdowns to go along with 300 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns with 0 turnovers on the year. Again, your scoring settings and my scoring settings may be a little different, but that would be about 414 points and 24.3 points per game. That would be quarterback 1 by 1.2 points per game over Josh Allen last year. That would be the high end of what we'd expect from CJ Stroud. Now, I would already say the under on his rushing is going to be below 167 and 3 rushing touchdowns. But to get to that level, you're expecting him to essentially like double his rushing yards and add 1 more rushing touchdown. That's on top of increasing his passing touchdown, almost doubling it, right? And then cutting his turnovers down. Like that's how difficult it would be to have one of those outlier type seasons when it comes to CJ Stroud. And Josh Allen, I'm already expecting that Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts are going to have that negative regression when it comes to the rushing touchdowns there. That's why I would be going after other guys in this department to jump CJ Stroud all the way to this level. Like, yeah, that he would definitely be returning on that investment. Even in your fantasy pros leagues where he's going at quarterback 5, 47 overall. Yeah, smash that. If that's what you think he's going to be capable of doing, smash that all day because he's going to return on that investment at that point. But I think it's going to be relatively difficult. And the other thing that I would bring up with this, because I would talk about the wide receiver room, is Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs, and Tank Dell that I would be looking at doing over underline on all 3 of these guys, 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns. If any of those guys doesn't hit their marks, yeah, maybe somebody else can benefit off of that. But that other guy would have to benefit for CJ Stroud to continue to be able to do about 4,700 yards just from the fantasy relevant toys that we're expecting to have this year. So again, someone can't drop off without someone else picking up the slack, or CJ Stroud does not return on your investment at that quarterback 5 range. And in this case, when I bring up this ESPN league, probably looking at Joe Burrow having about the same range of outcomes as CJ Stroud going in this range. That's why I have Joe Burrow here. I'm going to have the relative history of the nimbly bimbly in a way that CJ Stroud doesn't have, because Joe Burrow did this back in college. It's something that we can guess may stay relatively consistent in a way that maybe we would have guessed that CJ Stroud is going to have that like negative regression relative to what he did as a rookie in the NFL, with the necessary need for an improvement in the passing department. So Dak Prescott going at this range in the draft, probably going to be an equal range of outcomes to CJ Stroud, high volume passing offense, maybe going to get that negative regression from Dak Prescott. And then Anthony Richardson going in this range. Again, this is why I would have Anthony Richardson so much higher, is the ability for Anthony Richardson to win me a league is likely higher and return on the amount of investment that I'm putting into him. So at the price that I'm spending on CJ Stroud, if he just generally has, about the same as he did last year, you're looking at Brock Purdy, 4,200 yards, 31 touchdowns to go along with 144, 2 touchdowns. If you're getting CJ Stroud again from last year to this year, I would probably be more willing to go down and spend Brock Purdy prices 20 picks later. Or on Fantasy Pros, and I bring this up, where CJ Stroud is going 47 overall, I can wait about 30 picks and smash my Brock Purdy and get like a relatively the same production for last year to this year. So in order for me to be drafting CJ Stroud, and I bring this one up again with the scoring settings, just getting Dak Prescott at 20.2 points a game is not worth quarterback 6 or quarterback 5, where he's going on some of these leagues, because I can just keep continuing to kick the can down the road, play quarterback chicken in my league. And there are other guys that have the same ceiling as a CJ Stroud. Well, I shouldn't say the same ceiling. It would be more likely to a median range of outcomes, a middle of the road range of outcomes, even all the way down to Trevor Lawrence. And that's why I have Trevor Lawrence brought down here. He's 136 on this ESPN league. And if I were to guess the same type of season that both these guys are likely to have, Trevor Lawrence having a 400 to 500 yard increase in passing yards to go along with, say, even like 9 passing touchdowns to put him at 30, he's likely going to have a higher overall rushing floor to go along with the increase that we're expecting CJ Stroud to have relative to Trevor Lawrence. And I'm spending such less draft capital on relative to Trevor Lawrence busting, again, returning on that, I think it's like 16.6 that he did last year, 16.4, in order for him to return on that relative to CJ Stroud, who did 18.4 in these league settings, to be able to return versus busting at the price that I'm spending on him. There are probably better roads for me to go in my league to have the ability to win a league, for him to be a punt, to give me that 40-degree day, relative to the idea that he's going to throw for 5,000 yards, 40 touchdowns to go along with 300 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns in order for him to quote unquote be a league winner, compared to the other guys out there that are going at the prices that they're going at. That's just how I would look at it in general with CJ Stroud. So with these wide receivers, I do generally have Nico Collins as my wide receiver 17. He's going wide receiver 18 on Fantasy Pros, 32 overall. On Underdog, he's going wide receiver 14 with an ADP of 20. And then on ESPN, he is going wide receiver 15, 36 overall. I do think he has the highest ceiling. He's the most likely to eat into the production of the other 2 projected starting wide receivers for the Texans. I just don't know how much more he's going to be able to return on that. And that's if he stays healthy at this point. There has been a little bit of a problem with CJ Stroud or Nico Collins staying healthy. 14 games in 2021, 10 games in 2022, and 15 games last year. So they did sign or re-sign Nico Collins to a 3-year, $72.75 million a year contract with $52 million guarantee and an out after 2026. So they're telling everybody like, hey, We think he is, with the reset market, we think that he is relatively a strong, solid wide receiver one, right? And we also have to project out with Nico Collins that he's likely to stay healthy for 17 games. And at this point, based off his track record, I'm going to say like the under on that one, even though it's not probably that big of a deal overall. It's really difficult for him to be able to return on this investment. And again, part of what you're looking at with Nico Collins is how much of a how much of a difference he was in a week-to-week basis when he was healthy, because you're looking at like this 17.4 points a game and half point PPR. I think this is full point PPR in ESPN. Actually, the difference between him at being a mid-range wide receiver one, there would be a lot of theoretical return and hit at him going in this range of wide receiver 15. It just becomes an issue like how much more can we get out of him? I do like this price in general. There is a lot of risks. There's still enough risk involved with Nico Collins at the price that he's going at. Now, I have Stefon Diggs at wide receiver 24 overall. I'm still projecting him to do about 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns. Again, the receptions are probably not going to make that big of a difference at this rate. We could probably go like 80 or 90 receptions. Then you're trying to model attempts and efficiency, and that's just stuff that I don't think it's worth trying to guess on, because you're just not going to be able to hit those numbers within a nice enough range of predictability, versus like on a week-to-week basis for it to matter, because those spike weeks matter. So in the case of Stefon Diggs, he's going my wide receiver 24. I think he's the safest one out of the bunch, even though at 1,200 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns, I would generally pick the under on. He's going wide receiver 24 on Fantasy Pros, 44 overall. On ESPN, you're looking at him going wide receiver 19, 40 overall, which I think is slightly overvalued. On Underdog, he's going wide receiver 20 with an ADP of 28.3. He is going to be 31 in November. So this is over the age apex for wide receivers. They restructured his contract, and I have this pulled up, to a 1 year, $22.5 million contract. So he's on a 1 year rental with the Texans this year. Expecting that like they're not going to push him vertically down the field. He's going to be the chain mover in this offense. The Keenan Allen, and Nico Collins is still going to do those like big boy in breaking routes downfield. That's why I would have these guys set up the way they are, with the expectation that in order for Stefon Diggs to take a quote unquote step forward, he's going to have to eat in either Tank Dell, Dalton Schultz, or Nico Collins. So that's part of what makes it very difficult. You're kind of guessing with Stefon Diggs that you want, or you're going to be okay with something along the lines of 1,000 yards receiving and 6 touchdowns, if he doesn't take over as the number one in this offense. The other thing to talk about is, yes, it's probably likely that Stefon Diggs and Nico Collins are going to be the 2 wide receivers in two wide receiver sets. I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal, because I imagine they're going to be in a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, even though the 4th round draft pick may tell us that they're going to be in a little bit or a lot of 2 tight end sets. That's something that we'll talk about here in a second. Finally, you're looking at Tank Dell going at wide receiver 44, or he's my wide receiver 44. I think he's the guy who's going to be the boom bust candidate out of the bunch. So I could definitely still see him doing 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns if he stays healthy. His ability to win you weeks is going to be predicated on how many weeks he loses. You're probably not going to see this like consistent distribution of targets and touchdowns and yards between all 3 of these wide receivers. So Nico Collins may be able to give you that statistic or that safe week every week with those spike weeks. Stefon Diggs is likely not going to have this higher range of spike weeks to go along with it. And Tank Dell's just going to be all over the place, where, some weeks he's going to do these like 1 for 3 for 16. And then you're going to get like 10 for 7 for 72 and a touchdown the week after that. It's going to be like very difficult to predict like how he's going to integrate in this offense. Every passing touchdown that goes to one guy doesn't go to another guy. Just remember that in this case. So he is going wide receiver 29 on Fantasy Pros, 56 overall. On Underdog, he's going wide receiver 26 with an ADP of 36.9. Again, everybody's expecting this offense to be good. Someone's going to have to be wrong in this. And then over on ESPN, he's going wide receiver 28, 52 overall. So we talked about this yesterday with George Pickens, and I have Pickens down at like wide receiver 39. Those boom bust guys have to have to fit into specific builds. Because if I'm expecting to get consistency out of that slot relative to my opponent, I'm likely going to win a week or lose a week as often as I am to win a week. That means I generally would think that I want to have safer players around a wide receiver 2, or to be rolling these guys out in a flex spot or wide receiver 3 spot. That's how I would break these down. That's why I would have Tank Dell as low as I do. I'm likely going to be moving him up as the offseason progresses and we try and get like certain information out of other camps. So I could definitely see pushing him up towards that like wide receiver 36 range. But overall, like I think he's going to be like high variance. And these are guys that like I generally like to stay away from with their ability to win or lose me leagues. And to bring up our good friend George Pickens yesterday, like if you don't get these weeks to hit in the right weeks, and you're probably not going to be able to predict it, especially this early on. If you don't get these spike weeks to happen in the right weeks with George Pickens, this is why George Pickens was a league winner with these 2 spike weeks that he has coming off of these 2 down weeks that he had the week before that. Like, there are guys that I think are going to have greater consistency with upside that I can get later on in the draft or even in the same range as a Tank Dell. And to bring up Tank Dell 56 overall, like right around George Pickens again. If I can get a Trey McBride to theoretically have the same amount of points, but be more consistent about it, I may be more interested because he's a tight end. Same thing with Mark Andrews. And then there's going to be other guys like a Scary Terry may have a higher range of outcomes attached to the rookie Jaden Daniels. Like these are guys that I generally like. And even to go like a round earlier, like there's Dalton Kincaid that I could go up and get to give me a better chance, I think, to win a league than the potential that Tank Dell is going to give me a spike week in those handful of weeks that I need him to spike, right? So I may be buying like 5 to 7 wins from Tank Dell, but I'm also going to be buying like 5 to 7 losses to go along with him in ways that I'm likely not going to be able to, or I'm not going to get from Stefon Diggs, being a little bit safer, or Nico Collins having the overall upside of all these guys. That's why I would rank them the way that they do, even though I generally think that they have the same over underline attached to the offense. And I am expecting that CJ Stroud is going to have, for lack of a better way to put it, like a significant statistical increase in passing yards and passing touchdowns. All right. The other thing to talk about is if any of these guys go down with Noah Brown, Robert Woods, Bobby Trees, and John Mechie on the lineup, and I expect all these guys to make the team, you're just going to have like a poor man's version of them to slot back in. So Robert Woods can probably play the security blanket to Stefon Diggs. That's kind of what he was doing in the offense last year with his snaps. And then Noah Brown did step in and play that X role for Nico Collins. And then finally, John Mechie, who looks like a bust as a first-round draft pick, would theoretically be able to step in and play kind of this dynamic slot type role that Tank Dell was playing. So I do think all these guys are going to make the roster. It's just going to be a matter of who's healthy on game day. The other guy that I definitely think is going to make the roster is going to be Ben Skoranek, the wide receiver that they traded for from the Rams, to play special teams, to have a particular role play in the offense. So he's probably the most likely to make the roster out of like Noah Brown, Robert Woods, and John Mechie. John Mechie is going to be a first-round draft pick. He's likely going to stay on the team. Skoranek's going to stay on the team. They re-signed Noah Brown. Robert Woods would be the guy that's probably, it says right there on Fantasy Pros, the most likely to get cut. They don't need to cut him. I don't know why they would, considering what he could probably give to the roster. Wouldn't expect him to be active on most game days going forward. Hopefully you guys can hear that the construction going on outside the house. All right, to go on to the tight end room with Dalton Schultz, because I'm expecting that CJ Stroud will have this higher volume passing offense. It will be a good offense. There will be a lot of yards and touchdowns to go around. I would say Dalton Schultz is going to do about like 800 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns. That would probably put him in the range, if he does that, of like 10 point a game tight end. Not going to win you a league, going to be a very safe, unsexy pick, which is not a bad idea. It's smart. The best place to get a piece of this offense is likely going to be your Dalton Schultz shares. He's my tight end 19 because I just can't see a way that he wins me a league. It's not that I think he's bad. He's going tight end 13 on Fantasy Pros, 121 overall. I'll bring this back up. On Underdog, he's going tight end 13, 128 overall. And on ESPN, he's going down here like tight end 14, 132 overall. And again, I think this is where he should be going. I think he's going to have a lot of value as a punt to get a hold of this piece. Like if I'm just trying to say, hey, I want to have that steady, slow and steady guide to win me a league outside, as a punt, that's where I would be going with Dalton Schultz. There are other guys that I would be looking to take that flyer at if I was trying to win a league. And we talk about like your Brock Bowers, your Juwan Johnson, your Ben Sinats, your Daniel Bellingers, probably have better chances to win me a league than Dalton Schultz does. They also have better chances to lose me a league than Dalton Schultz does, going at this range attached to this offense in general. And again, the other thing that I'm probably the least worried about when it comes to all these guys is his role in the offense. He's least likely to get eaten into by the cannibalization that's going to go on with these wide receivers. So like, I generally think like if he stays healthy, he did 635 yards receiving last year, 5 touchdowns. Like I am going to say there's going to be a step forward in that. But there's almost zero way he's going to be eaten into because of his role. And I don't necessarily think that's going to be the case. I think there's just as good a chance that Nico Collins does 1,500 yards as, Stefon Diggs does like under 1,000 yards receiving at this point relative to their cost. I just don't see how your Dalton Schultz is going to go for like 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns in order for him to flirt with winning you a league. And they did re-sign him to a 3-year, $36 million contract. So they are expecting, that's good. That's good tight end money. They are expecting good things out of him going forward with an out. And I have this written down. The out on Dalton Schultz is going to be 23.5 million guaranteed out after 2025. So the other thing is they brought in 4th round draft pick Cade Stover out of Ohio State. I do like Cade Stover a little bit more of a blocker, I think, than Dalton Schultz is. Doesn't mean that I think like Cade Stover is a great blocker. But I could also see that they're going to have the flexibility to play 2 tight ends a little bit more than they were last year. And part of the reason why I bring this up is that's going to eat into the theoretical upside of one of these 3 wide receivers. That's probably going to be Tank Dell. So if we're expecting, like we talked about yesterday, with the Steelers being in about like 60% 2 tight end sets, and that would maybe be one of the higher ones in the league. How much of the time that they're taking a 4th round draft pick, which is a premium pick, and being in 2 tight end sets, that means one of those wide receivers isn't going to be on the field, which means they're not going to be able to maximize your return on investment with all 3 of those wide receivers. Because I think with that 4th round draft pick, with what Cade Stover can do and what it would theoretically be able to give them a real world football advantage in specific weeks against specific teams, you're definitely looking at like one of these 3 wide receivers not being able to return, because there is probably going to be 1 or 2 Cade Stover weeks. And what I mean by Cade Stover weeks is every single receiving touchdown Cade Stover gets, it ain't going to one of those wide receivers. Right. So anyway, the last point of this I want to talk about is going to be this Ramondre Stevenson. Looks like he may actually get a contract done with the Patriots. And I bring this up because like they're going to tell us what they think Ramondre is worth, and that's going to better give us an idea of what he's going to be worth from a fantasy perspective relative to the contract that Antonio Gibson signed. So why does this matter? Well, the Texans went out and they traded for Joe Mixon, and I don't really care about this like Joe Mixon, Dameon Pierce viewed as 1-2 punch. The Texans went out and they traded for Joe Mixon, and they re-signed him to a 3-year, $25 million contract with $16 million guaranteed and an out after 2025. And that didn't even pull that up. But anyway, so in this case with Joe Mixon, like they're expecting him to be on the roster next year. And this is just generally going to be a guy who's, okay at football attached to a really good offense. And the money that they paid Joe Mixon was $16 million guaranteed, 3 years, $25 million contract. That's roughly, like we'll say like $8 million a year, or we can say $8 million a year because of the 16 guarantee that they gave him. Right. That idea is when we're looking at some of the other guys that they paid that money to in the league, your Aaron Jones, your that got $7 million for 1 year going to the Vikings, $8 million a year to go to DeAndre Swift going to the Bears, something along those lines, like $12 million for your Saquon Barkley's, your $12 million going to Josh Jacobs. It's going to give us an idea of what they think of Joe Mixon from a real world perspective. That's like low end running back 1 money, high end running back 2 money. That's exactly what he's basically being valued at from a fantasy football perspective. So I have him as my running back 12 because it doesn't matter how efficient he is or how good he is. He's going to have a lot of good opportunity attached to what we are projecting to be a good offense. He's going running back 15 on Fantasy Pros, 45 overall on ESPN. He's going running back 12, 24 overall. I don't like the 24 overall. And then on Underdog, he is going at running back 15 with an ADP of 60.7. Again, that's a best ball wide receiver league. So in this case, I had to send a text to one of my co-managers when I was breaking this down because he hates Joe Mixon from a fantasy perspective. He just doesn't think he's good at football. And again, it doesn't matter like how stinky Joe Mixon is. The opportunity to score touchdowns attached to this offense is probably going to be too good to pass up when he's going at like wide receiver 47 or at 45 overall. So yeah, I probably would rather have my Joe Mixon shares to be able to have plus or minus 10 touchdowns, 1,000 yards rushing, and like 300 yards receiving relative to the chance that CJ Stroud is going to be able to return at that 47 overall price tag at this rate going on. So the other thing to be looking at is if he's going at like 24 overall, that's probably like way overvalued relative to the ability for Joe Mixon to win me a league as a low end running back 1 or a high end running back 2 attached to this offense. He's never been relatively efficient in the first place. 3.9 yards rushing in 2022, 4.02 in 2023. He does turn 28 in July, which is the edge of the second running back age apex. So we can get one more year out of Joe Mixon. He doesn't have to be anything more than what we've gotten before with Joe Mixon attached to a good offense in Cincinnati. Just do it again one more time at the price he's going at. He does have that a little bit of ability to win me a league at the price he's going at if he's going 47 overall, not 24 overall on this ESPN type league. When it comes to the other guys in this offense, Dameon Pierce at this point, I'm going to say is like a 50-50 chance to make the roster. So the little things that I look at, they signed British Brooks, rookie from North Carolina, undrafted. Now, I don't know anything about him until I started looking it up. This is a graduate student captain who's been injured in his career, who's going to play special teams. He's 5'11", 225. Looks like he ran like a sub 4.640. Yeah, Dameon Pierce is a 4th round draft pick that disappointed last year. So what do I think is more than likely going to occur? Well, Dameon Pierce is either going to get cut or traded, and British Brooks is going to make the roster to play special teams because Dameon Pierce is likely not going to play special teams. I'm not going to be shocked if that happened. And if that happens, like there's going to be like no 1-2 punch with Dameon Pierce and Joe Mixon in this offense. They're paying Joe Mixon to do 70% snaps. I'm expecting Joe Mixon to get 70% snaps. That would be what would worry me a little bit is some of the goal line run that would make Joe Mixon valuable may end up going to Dameon Pierce as this bludgeon. The other guy is they re-signed Derry. I'm not even going to pretend how to pronounce that. He can play some special teams. He might eat into Joe Mixon a little bit in the passing game department. They got Jawar Jordan, rookie from Louisville, to come in here. In the 6th round, I don't necessarily think he's going to eat into the receiving role because Derry is going to play special teams in that regard. So I definitely see that's how the roster is going to shake out. So anyway, that's about all I got for today. I do like Joe Mixon if he falls to that 47 range. I don't like him if he's going to be going in that 24 range. I think that CJ Stroud is going to be well overvalued relative to other guys that are going to be going in leagues that are undervalued. Doesn't mean that I don't think he's going to have this high upside. I just think the road for him to give you that league winner relative to the rushing upside that the other guys like Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, theoretically Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, and Jalen Daniels is going to be harder for him to return if he's going in that like 45 overall quarterback 5 type of range. Do like Nico at his range. Sort of like Stefon Diggs at his range. I don't particularly like Tank Dell where he's going because someone's going to lose out of these 3 wide receivers, and it's likely going to be the guy that's not on the field. Didn't even talk about the fact that like I am also a little concerned with the injury that he's coming off of, expecting that he's going to be 100% at the beginning of the season. he may end up with the two things ramping up in the offseason into the season, being the third wide receiver. He may be the guy that has like the hardest road to return overall on that investment. And then I really do like Dalton Schultz, even though I don't think that he has necessarily the road to win me a league like some of the other guys are out there. So anyway, that's about all I got for today. And yeah, I'll see you guys maybe tomorrow.